Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. Today's session, we've got a great panel together to discuss the future of access governance for SAP, lessons learned from SAPinsider GRC 2020, which we just wrapped up last week. So before we jump in here, just some quick housekeeping. If you have any audio issues during this webinar, go ahead and click on Preferences and look at Audio. From there, you can check to see if you are using the appropriate audio device. You can also click the play sound to check if you can hear the sound coming from your speaker. This presentation will take about 45 minutes, and there will also be a Q&A session following the presentation. So please type any questions you have in the Q&A box for our speakers to answer at the end of the event. If there's any pertinent questions, as we're going through this, we'll try to address that as well. And to prevent background noise, everyone is going to be on mute. All right, so today's panelists, we've got Susan Stapleton, Stephen Duberbrock, and Alan Cutting, and it's being moderated by myself, Ryan Quinones. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to our panelists for a quick introduction.
Thanks, Ryan. I'll go first. We'll go in order. My name is Susan Stapleton, and I've been with Pathlock for almost 13 years now, and I have been in GRC for all of those years, plus more. I came from SAP, and I was responsible for their GRC products. So thanks, Ryan. Happy to be here today. Steve?
Thanks, Susan. So I'm Steve Duberbrock. I formerly was marketing lead at Security Weaver, and with the acquisition, I've come over to Pathlock, and I'm responsible for the product marketing side of the house. Alan?
Hi, I'm Alan Cutting. I've been in the SAP Security GRC space for about 25 years. I was at Security Weaver for a couple of years before coming over with the merger with Pathlock, and happy to be here.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. With that, we'll jump into a very quick overview of Pathlock, who we are and kind of where we got to today. So Pathlock today is really the culmination of 4 major players and a few others, all prominently in the SAP space across access governance, data security and governance, and application security. So we're all really excited about this merger of these big brands, because really we're coming forward with 360-degree protection for your application security and helping automate controls throughout your landscape here. That's really exciting news for us here. We even have some great comment from Martin Kuppinger Cole Reports here, really just kind of alluding to the potential that we're bringing together with these players and really in a centralized integrated solution. With that, we've got customers all around the world, leading partners with ISVs as well as other consultancies out there. And we're serving millions of customers, monitoring billions of business activities. And we're now over 500 employees worldwide. And all this is coming back together to really help our customers achieve ROI in a space that's rapidly changing. And that's an area I think we'll discuss today in the future of GRC, what this change is looking like and what we took away from SAPinsider. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and jump into our panel discussion today here. We'll start out with an event recap. So I'm going to go around to our panelists today and just kind of ask us some questions here. And, let's see what everybody thought of the event. So I'll go ahead and start out with you, Susan, and we'll pass this question to each of you guys. Overall, how do you think the show went?
I thought the show was great. This is a show that if you're an SAP and GRC, you kind of look forward to every year. So it's glad to get back in person this time. And for me, I just really, really appreciate getting to meet people face to face. And we haven't done that for a long time. So I thought the show was great, very well attended. People were there on a mission. They were all looking to find something, find out something, talk to other customers. I thought it was great.
Great. All right.
I agree. It was a really, really enjoyable show. It felt a little bit like I had woken up after a 2-year nap. It was really, really good to be back. This was the first show that I had had been to in a couple of years, and to see see that many people again talking about SAP governance and sort of their SAP control roadmap was really enjoyable, both from just a personal kind of perspective, but also in terms of just to learn firsthand where people were in their journey. And I also really enjoyed the sessions that I attended. It's there's something I think that is just more enjoyable to learn firsthand from somebody who's up speaking in front of you than it is through some digital meeting or through a webinar. Of course, I say that in the middle of a webinar, but I just really enjoyed being able to have that kind of a learning opportunity. It was good.
Fantastic.
I thought it was great too. From the initial kickoff meeting with a couple thousand people in the room, all of the energy, and then going out to the floor and finally meeting people in person. I think for a lot of people, it's like a celebration after COVID, and it was neat to see what SAP is doing and the challenges that everybody's had, both from COVID and supply chain, and talking to people in person, coming by the booth. It was really fun.
I have one alibi on that also, or one other comment to make. The I've always been to these SAP events as a small, scrappy little startup. So we had our small, kind of 10 by 10, or sometimes if we splurged, the 10 by 20 sort of presence on the booth floor. And and now with this combined Pathlock entity, we ended up with not one but two booths, and then probably one of the largest booths in the entire conference. So that was pretty fun to not have to ever explain directions for how to find your booth if people wanted to know more information. It was fun to see the presence that Pathlock, now that it's probably 8 times bigger than any of the other 8 companies that it acquired, was able to have at the show. A really great sponsorship opportunity for us.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was fun. I mean, I want to just add it. I took some joy out of seeing everybody with their green Pathlock bag running around the conference. Made for easy conversation starters out there, which was certainly great. So what do you guys think about some of the other sponsors in there and just kind of general attendance of the show? This is the kind of first time getting back to normal. How does this compare back to previous events? Alan, we'll go ahead and start with you.
This is actually my first SAPinsider show, so I don't have a frame of reference, but I was really impressed by the number of vendors there. I didn't know there were that many vendors in the space, to tell you the truth. And everybody seemed real excited about their product. And I actually didn't see too many other presentations because I was at the booth most of the time. But it was a lot of fun seeing everybody. And I met some friends that I haven't seen in 20 years. I recognized them at another vendor. So that was fun to reconnect.
It's a small world in the SAP space. Sometimes you could definitely begin to develop good relationships with the other sponsors. There were 2 things that stood out for me on the sponsorship side. One was this year they combined a couple of events that sometimes SAPinsider has separately. So there was a stronger finance component than some of the other SAP shows pre-pandemic. A lot of times they would have their own conference. So I think that was a good decision by the SAPinsider folks, because it brought more energy to the conference than I think if they had continued to split it out into the different the different trade shows. I noticed that they did run the supply chain event shortly after ours, but it was a much smaller situation. The other thing that surprised me was who wasn't there. You know, you're always looking for who are the competitors and what do they have to offer. And it was interesting to see that there were several folks that I expected us to kind of learn a little bit about what they were doing in the market and if they were still competitors of ours in any real way. And several of them weren't even there. So that was a surprise a little bit for me to see the absence. Of course, we did our research beforehand, so we knew who wasn't going to be there, and who was. But it was still surprising to see that as well.
I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum from Alan. I've been to every one of these conferences, and the very first one was called the GRC Insider event, and I think that's where it was announced that SAP had bought Versa, which then became the GRC product line. And then over the years, they've started co-locating these conferences and bringing in finance. There was finance and HR, and now there's, I think there were 6 or 7 tracks co-located. And I think for me, that's important in these events because customers and people that are in the space wear a lot of different hats. They might have a cyber title, an internal controls. They're all dealing with transformation. I thought it was a really good event with multiple types of tracks that if you had, multiple interests, you could cover off a lot of those and get a lot of conversations around various topics. So I think that definitely lends with how many people were there. But I thought, I thought it was very well attended, and I thought the people there, of course, I manage the SAP partnership here at Pathlock, so I'm very focused on SAP products and customers. And so, yeah, I thought it was really nice and a huge transformation from when it started years ago, which was in the Bellagio, the very first one. And I think this is the second time it's been held in the Bellagio. So kind of full circle moment for the SAP Insider event.
That's great. Yeah, full circle, coming back around. It's always good to see. And like you guys mentioned, having all these tracks together was kind of like a melting pot of everything that SAP touches. And, it's obviously very broad. You're touching all parts of the organization. With that, I think it's a good time to jump into some of the session highlights here. I know some of you guys have the opportunity to jump in and see some other sessions. Also, everybody here presented at SAP Insider. Some of you guys for multiple sessions. I want to ask each of you to tell us a little bit more about the session or sessions you guys presented, and maybe any interesting takeaways or questions that you got from engaging with your audience.
Do you want to start with that, Ryan? You want me to take it?
I'm totally going to send it to you because I think you had the most sessions out of anybody.
Yeah, I had a couple of full sessions with customers. I had one that was just a Q&A panel, which I appreciate as a prior customer, to where you can just open up the opportunity for customers to ask existing users of software what they've done in their journey, how they've gotten there, and tips and tricks and things that work and things that don't work. So my first session was with Stanley Black & Decker and Jabil, just as a customer panel. And then my second one was, again, with Jabil, digging deeper, like a case study. So I really like to have customers talking to people that are living the same life that they're living day in and day out, that they can, get really good information from. And my other session was just simply a 20-minute demo on the show floor, which is nice just to kind of give everybody a little bit more of a deeper glimpse into some of the automation opportunities they have as they're moving through S4, transforming their controls and so on. So those were my 3 sessions. I thought they were all pretty well attended. Sometimes you're in a huge room and it doesn't look so well attended, but I was very pleased with the participation within my sessions. You never know for sure, but I thought I was happy with them.
Great. Alan, would you like to jump in next?
Yeah, I gave one presentation, which was when you should start your security cleanup work before an S/4HANA implementation, whether you should start it before, during, or after. I went through that and then did a close-up on one of our tools, Authorization Architect, and how that could help streamline the upgrade and save time and eliminate risk. Had some good interest there. I spoke with some people afterwards who had just gone through an SAP cleanup project, and they could feel the pain that I described in some processes, and very eager to learn more about how some of our tools could help them out.
I have to comment on Alan's session. I attended it, and what he's politely saying is that at the end of actually before he had finished his session, a couple of people in the audience got so excited about what he was saying because they felt like it related to them so much that they started asking him questions, and they started giving comments, and he couldn't actually finish his presentation because the next speaker had to come on because he was dealing with so many of those interruptions about, oh, let me tell you about this nightmare that we just went through. It's so exactly what you were saying. And it was really fun to see a couple people get so excited and animated about a really challenging experience they had recently had with regards to role redesign. That was pretty fun to see.
Yeah.
I gave a session on actually it was a session that largely was developed by you, Brian, and you were a co-presenter with Rajesh and I.
Thing with Rajesh, yes.
So while certainly I gave the session, I want to make sure to frame it in a way that folks realize that I was more of the warm-up act. That it was really you and Rajesh that had the real insights. But I'm a standards guy, and I think that's a key to doing anything right in IT, and that's what the session that you and I gave was all about, was how do you take a set of standards, in this case a set that were developed by Gartner around adaptive security, and make sure that when you build controls for your SAP landscape, that you're looking at making those controls flexible, and as different requirements arise, you're able to quickly adapt those controls, even in real time, to make sure that you're securing your SAP landscape properly without creating a burden on the users or impinging on user productivity. And I think it was a good session. There seemed to be a lot of folks raising their hands and asking questions about how do we apply the standards, or how do we apply this adaptive security framework in different contexts, or how do we actually make sure that it's providing value to folks. So I thought it was a good, and as Susan said, it's fun to see people that are there on a mission and that have some very specific questions that they're trying to get answered as part of their attendance at the show, because we clearly saw that happen during the session. And I'll turn it back to you. You know, what were some of the things that you thought about the session that you gave with me?
Absolutely, yeah. You know, I want to kind of resonate with everybody here said. I think one of the most satisfying things is presenting this thing, and you're getting questions that are hitting the nail on the head. And in those short conversations after the presentation where they come up to you and say, this is exactly what we're going through, like that is the most satisfying thing. You're out there talking to the problems and challenges that these folks are facing in their day-to-day lives here. I think our session was great. I really enjoyed talking on the subject that was, I think kind of pertinent to the time, really around this adaptive security model here. Excuse me. Just kind of how we're seeing the space move, especially with work from home in there. Folks are having to address new risks, and I think it went well, and overall it was a good session. I mean, with that, I think we chatted on our own sessions. Did anybody else here have a chance to attend some other sessions? Anything that stood out for you?
Well, I will mention that I also attended Susan's Jabil customer session, and I really enjoyed that. just really like seeing how clear it was that Jabil was on the return on investment that they got around quantifying their user risk. It was really fun to see that conversation. And then a couple of other sessions that I attended had to do with looking at applying agile principles and practices to your control environment. PwC, I thought, gave a couple of presentations around agile control development that were really good. I think people are realizing that when it comes to controlling and governing your SAP landscape, you can't just build something once and then you're done. Controls are constantly evolving, requirements are constantly changing, and that you really have to take an agile approach rather than a waterfall approach when it comes to managing SAP. I really liked there were 2 or 3 sessions that were all about agile and your SAP control environment.
Absolutely. You know, I'll add to that, maybe on the agile side, but just really how the focus is broadening much larger. I attended a risk management session, and it was great to see just really how they're expanding the scope of these things to include all these new applications and new risks that are arising from the always constant changes that folks are facing in their application landscape. With that, I think we'll good time to jump into really the next session here. Trends in GRC. You know, we all touched on certain topics in our presentations and what we stopped by, but you know, we're talking to customers here, we're talking to prospects at these events. You know, sometimes it's confirming, you know, what we've been presenting, that you know, it's hitting the nail on the head. Other times we're discovering, you know, new information, new challenges these folks are facing, or sometimes, you know, new best practices here. So is there anything that stood out in terms of trends you're seeing in the GRC space?
I'll jump in. I think definitely the biggest trend is just trying to cover more applications in your GRC scope. Everybody focused so heavily on SAP. Now things are changing drastically, and you know, we used to have the standard rule set to manage procure to pay, HR payroll, general inventory, general finance. All of that was within SAP. Of course, all of that is changing now, and all of these customers are adopting best-of-breed solutions. Users have access to multiple systems, and the GRC teams are very interested in how can they manage all of that change in one source of truth. And of course, from an SAP perspective, a lot of them are running the SAP GRC solution, so they're looking to figure out how can they adapt that, how can they get that, you know, to cover more of their SAP cloud, non-SAP systems. And then I think the other thing is, if you don't have really concise processes, automation, really looking at how you can streamline processes through continuous monitoring, you know, agile projects. Customers' risks are changing drastically. I mean, it's still kind of procure to pay, supply chain, and different HR payroll, but the risks are different. And then there's also companies that are doing more things, joint venture risks, just kind of outside the norm of what we were seeing just within the SAP ERP. So I think a lot of people were there on fact-finding missions to try to figure out how to manage things in this new world of digital transformation and adoption of tons of systems. And that was the majority of my conversations, I think. And also, you know, how do you manage privileged access to systems that you get a admin role that gives you keys to the kingdom, and that's the only way you can get in and do firefighting or, you know, get elevated access to systems. How do you monitor things like that in cloud apps? So I think a lot of people were looking at just how to evolve their transformation or their control processes.
That's great. I mean, was there technology that stuck out, or initiatives that stuck out? I know I had a few conversations where, you know, like our organization is, you know, going through a goal to automate as much as we can. They came to us looking for continuous monitoring. You know, is there anything specific solution areas that stuck out for you there?
Well, of course, you know, I'm focused on the SAP side of the house, so our Pathlock solutions can solve a lot of those challenges, whether it's process controls through SAP process control and putting CCMs in place for Ariba or Coupa and utilizing your process control investment to do that. Same with access control. And then the Pathlock solutions we sell through SAP. I mean, they are really SAP applications provided by Pathlock. But yeah, we have solutions for all of those challenges that customers have, and I think a lot of them might not have been aware that a lot of these things could be automated and leverage a lot of their existing software investments. So we had a lot of conversations around that.
Great, that's always good to hear. Yeah, and for the attendees in this, I mean, it's a big educational exercise, and a lot of it is discovering what's out there. Alan, how about you?
I think that there's still a lot of energy going into in the security space of looking at role management design, moving to S/4HANA. There's a ton of customers who haven't done that yet. And the people I spoke with recognize that this is a big upgrade. It's not the same as a small version upgrade. And you know, they're looking for ways to deal with the massive simplification that's taking place in SAP in programs and processes in S/4HANA, the hundreds of new T codes and the move to Fiori, and they recognize that's a big move, and they're trying to get their arms around that, and probably will be for a while.
Absolutely. Stephen?
Yeah, I find it interesting how things have shifted. I've been coming to these events for probably close to a decade, and it's interesting. The initial events, a lot of people, you'd ask them around what were their top concerns around managing SAP, and a large percentage would talk about how their auditors were starting to make them look at SOD conflicts and getting clear and reporting on those SOD conflicts. And that's not the case anymore. People are not sort of just discovering SODs in their SAP landscape and the need to manage it. There is I think, across the board awareness that acquiring a solution to manage your access risk is just a cost of owning SAP. There's almost no one who's asking questions now that show no experience with using one solution or someone else's solution to manage access risks. And it's interesting to have seen that maturity over time happen in this market. And now it's a question of, on the one hand, how do we reduce the cost of controlling SAP? And it's very much, we have a sense that we've been doing it for 3 or 4 years, and now we're aware of how costly it is to do some of these processes, and we've got to wring that cost out. Or it's, how do we go more broadly as more applications are now considered SOD relevant or material to an audit? How do we bring those in, as Susan was mentioning? And so I think there's a real focus, if you will, on folks in those two areas around access risk. And then I think there's also a hierarchy of risk that's beginning to happen. So whether it has to do with the configuration and patch management side of SAP and ensuring that the platform itself is secure and people can't attack it from a cybersecurity perspective, up through user risk, and then getting now, I think there's much more interest nowadays in terms of helping us understand where the data risk is located, and help us understand where transaction controls need to be put in place. It's very interesting to me, as I've talked with people, to see that move from why do I have to manage access risk in SAP? Doesn't it have its own very robust security model? To, yeah, I understand the cost of running SAP, and part of that has to do with proper access controls. How do I now reduce the cost of those processes and controls? And then how do I expand everything in all these access control issues across my application landscape? And how do I start to do more things around data protection? I think ABAC, or attribute-based access control, is now becoming a very common conversation with folks as they try to work through fine-grained data protection. So I think that the conversations have matured in some ways, which is really fun to see, and they've expanded into other areas, which are now much more pressing than they have been in the past.
Great points there. Yeah, it reminds me of kind of just seeing how, organizations first reacted to COVID and remote work. It was kind of a mad scramble. Everybody's hair was on fire, trying to figure out, how do we just, at the very core, secure access coming in. And oftentimes it was a VPN or remote desktop or whatever else. Now with that to stay, these organizations are looking a bit narrow and looking at the actual transaction or data level risks. And in terms of an overall trend, I noticed that we had a session on it, and there was probably 4 or 5 others that were really focusing down on that more fine-grained level to address some of your data risks. It's tying into compliance, it's tying into really the liability that an organization holds in terms of breach or anything else there. So kind of that, finer-grained approach to security was good to see. I think, data privacy is obviously becoming more of a thing here in the US, and I'm sure it already has been in Europe. But that's been great to see, as well as, as Alan was mentioning, just as kind of a recap here, S/4HANA kind of shifting left, if you will, bringing your role management and addressing some of the security things earlier on in the migration. It's a great trend. And I always crack up seeing, these migration time periods, because S4 came out, I don't know how many years ago now, but folks are still making that process, making the move. So it's good to see as more and more of these best practices come around. All right, we'll go ahead and jump over to wrap up here. So this is a question for each of you guys. What do you think the top priority in the GRC space companies should address over the next 12 months? Susan,
all right, so yeah, I think I just want to mention, add on a comment to what Steve was saying, because yeah. I remember the first conferences, people were just trying to figure out the bare minimum of what they had to do to get past the SOX requirements, and kind of waiting around to see where the market went, and waiting around to see how detailed they'd have to get in this SOX, world. And boy, has that shifted greatly into a completely different picture. But I agree that the customers are so much more mature. They're looking at things completely differently. And I think the customers are realizing they have to use software. They have to automate. There's no way you can keep up in this new world if you are the owner of internal controls, compliance, even a application owner or it's just impossible to interrogate multiple business applications to identify who's doing what do they have access to do, how do you provision compliantly, all of those things that we did for years in SAP, just focused on SAP. Now that all of these new applications, cloud applications are coming in, people realize you just have to figure out a way to streamline, be efficient, make things easier for the business. I find that to be a big key. As you're transforming the business and going through transformation, it's a good opportunity to relook at everything, like you said, on your risk. Relook at everything, relook at your processes. Do you have the right risk owners? Can you get them more involved? Can you give them information that's valuable instead of just looking at security off concepts or roles? Can you give them something that gives them, more information to help run the business better? Move to exception reporting only. Don't report everything under the sun for them to take a look at, but give them only what they need to look at and help them really take ownership of who's doing what in their systems, what do they have access to do. All of those things are, there's capabilities to do all of that. And I've always been a huge proponent of trying to get the business to take ownership of the, who's doing what in their applications. But you have to really facilitate that through a very efficient process. It was kind of long-winded.
I love it. Excellent point there. I like to kind of surmise it all. We've seen digital transformation really affect business. Now it's bringing it to GRC and seeing what value can really be added throughout everything else, and then how we can transform this. And all those points you just mentioned there, touch on it perfectly. So I mean, over the next 12 months, is there any like one thing that you think sticks out?
For me, in the
Sure.
next 12 months? Yeah, I just think there's going to be, I think a lot of people have moved to S4, but a lot of people haven't. And people have roadmaps that go years long in trying to, you know, move over to S4. I'd say in the next 12 months, get involved in conversations, make sure you're a key player in the strategy, internal controls, compliance, user access, all of that is upfront in those conversations. We all know that back in the day when we implemented SAP, security and controls was the last thing we looked at. And I just don't think you can do that in this world. The audit scrutiny over everything now, including SODs, critical access, that's not going to get less. And I think you have to be audit ready when you go live with your first S4 environment. A lot of companies are going country by country, business unit by business unit. Do it the first one, your first rollout, and then you have that topic covered, and you can just roll that out, you know, as you roll out the automated control process to each of the different locations or S4 environments as you go live with them, and take care of it up front. I think it's just so much more efficient and cost effective to do it that way than to come in after the fact to try to figure out how to manage these systems from an audit and internal control perspective.
Absolutely. Great. Let's see here. Stephen, Alan, who'd like to go next?
I'll jump in. So if someone were to sit me down and say, Steve, what should I do in the next 12 months? My consultant attitude might say, well, it depends, right? It kind of depends on what's going on in your company. It depends on what's going on in your market. I think there's one thing that probably it doesn't depend on. And this thing Susan touched on, and it's how do you make sure over the next 12 months that your IT control folks are tied in with your line of business folks? Because there's so much now that people are trying to do with regard to SAP controls, that if you have these two groups continuing to operate in silos, it's going to be progressively more difficult to implement any kind of thoughtful roadmap around S4 or cloud strategies. Either one of those are going to be impaired if those teams aren't working together. And then regardless of how well they're working together now, the closer they can come over the next 12 months, the more support that you'll have for an effective roadmap. So I'm making an assumption that every company running SAP has some type of control roadmap, some type of roadmap around how their adoption rate for SAP related technologies. If they don't have that, obviously they should have that. But if they can sit down and say, hey, here's some information that we're getting on the control side of the house that we think will help folks on the line of business side. If they can identify that data, then they'll improve their relationships significantly, and they'll improve the ability to plan together and work together materially. Susan's session, I thought, showed that in spades when she was up there talking with Jabel, and the comment was made that because they are now able to explain exactly the amount of financial risk, the quantified financial risk for the SOD violations that have occurred in their landscape over the last 6 months, that allows them to have a conversation with line of business owners that's productive. They don't sit down and have to talk about T codes and authorization objects and field values. They don't have to talk about some accounting specific jargon around what the particular SOD risk is. That they're actually able to just say, because of the way things are organized right now, you're generating 2 million or 4 million or 250K kinds of risks associated with access violations. And the business now has an ability to wrap their head around what they need to do to reduce the risk to the enterprise. And that's just one example with access risk, but the more they're able to identify, whether it's data related or whether it's user behavior related, the more they're able to identify the controls team, data that the operations team cares about, the more they're going to be able to work together. And now controls are becoming mature enough that they're actually providing not just risk management data, but operational data that can be insightful to the operations team and allow them to begin to own more of the risk management. So instead of it just being something that the IT security team needs to worry about, now it's something that everybody can benefit from. Collaborating together, and everybody can use the data in their own way, but it's still data that becomes useful in their particular or unique domain. So I think over the next 12 months, figure out how your IT security teams and your business, or your line of business folks can collaborate better in one way or another.
Love it. Building bridges for collaboration. Yeah, I think that's especially important. So as more and more the organization gets merged together, the more they can work together on these things, more value. Alan, how about you?
I'd say cross-application monitoring, both of non-SAP and non-ECC systems. It's kind of funny because when I first got into GRC, companies had just migrated into SAP, multiple different systems, different AR systems, accounts receivable systems, and inventory systems, and they brought all this into the SAP world. And then in recent years, they've started decentralizing into different HR systems and CRM systems and procurement systems. And for quite a while in GRC, as far as SODs, we're kind of assuming it's all in SAP, and it's not anymore. And so if customers don't have the monitoring in place to get the half of their risk that's in these other systems, then I think that should be a priority to make sure that they're picking up all of their cross-system risk. And then also the move to continuous monitoring of actual risks that have taken place, risky transactions, instead of just the theoretical risks that are out there from SODs, monitoring what's actually going on. It could be in warehousing or inventory. A lot of small transactions could be adding up to something really big at some very big companies. So I think the continuous monitoring is really important as well.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Let's see here. We'll go ahead and jump into QA here, because I think we're at about 45-minute mark. Any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat box there. You'll see in the webinar panel. I've got two right now. I think, Alan, this is probably going to be for you here. Any advice for organizations who have yet to migrate to S/4HANA? We are looking to move in Q3 next year. Any focus or any suggestions for what to focus on?
Well, a lot of things. It's funny because that's a lot of what my talk was about at the conference, but start early, getting people looking at it and analyzing. You need to look at your roles and see, are you happy the way the roles are now, or are there a lot of known deficiencies? And if there are, you're really best off to get the roles cleaned up now. And what you've got special tools for that. If you don't, you're going to have to meet with all your departments and find out what their qualms are with the roles and what they believe their people should have. They may have an idea how they would like the roles to operate or be organized, because they may be looking at how people get access to the roles through an IDM or something like that. So you need to have your talks early and start fixing the roles that you have right now. Eliminate all the transactions you can that are not being used, because you need to test almost all of your transactions once you're in HANA. So if you can eliminate all the ones in roles that people are not using, then that'll cut down on a lot of time and effort there. So you need a tool to do that, probably, to know your user history. I would say, I lost my train of thought there.
Good. So
Yeah.
Just a quick comment while Alan is maybe regaining his thinking, because or his train of thought there. Some of what he was talking about had to do with really monitoring user transactions, and we've found that folks who have a pretty robust transaction archive of user behavior prior to moving to S4 can identify what who should be the part of the testing team, because they've got either the broadest scope or the most interactions with your current SAP system, and all of that transaction history ends up feeding into role design efforts to optimize your access controls around S4HANA. The other thing that I would recommend is taking a step back and saying, why are you moving to S4HANA in the first place? And if you understand why you're moving to S4HANA, you will understand what the business risks are associated with the move. So if you're moving to S4HANA in order to move to a more data-centric decision-making organization, then data is where your risks are going to be. And so you need to make sure that you're taking that into account. If you're moving to S4HANA to optimize some aspects of the supply chain, then chances are the supply chain is where your business risks are, and looking at continuous controls or other kinds of mechanisms to ensure that you're adequately managing that risk makes a lot of sense. If you're moving to S4HANA because you want to drive a brand new Fiori-oriented hyper-productive user experience, then that's probably where your risks are going to be. So make sure that you're able to manage the risks associated with using Fiori more. I think a lot of times, and this goes to the comment Susan was making, a lot of times people think that security is a second order effect, but really security is something that needs to, and risk management is something that needs to be taken into account as part of why the decision is being made in the first place. And if you understand why you're moving to S4HANA, and then take a step and say, what does that mean in terms of our risk management strategy? You'll start to see a bunch of things that need to be done prior to that move in order to ensure that move is successful.
Perfect. Yeah.
And then I'll go back to where I lost my train of thought. I think you need to evaluate your current roles and determine if you're happy with the strategy that you're using now or not. Are you doing task-based where you've got thousands, 10,000s of roles, or are you doing position-based? Are you doing enabler roles? Are you satisfied with the way you're doing things? And if not, start addressing that before you even get into HANA. The other thing is look at your transaction replacement. A lot of transactions, hundreds of them, are going to go obsolete in HANA. They're going to be replaced by other transactions, or replaced by Fiori tiles. And if you don't have a tool, then you need to find the best way to look up what those replacements are going to be. It may be in the simplification guide, or maybe you can find another way to get that information. But start building out your matrices of what replacements you're going to have to do. You might also, if you don't have skill sets, start getting some Fiori training and get comfortable with Fiori. And then when the development HANA box comes up, then you'll be ready to jump into anything that's HANA specific.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Alan. Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, one last question here. And I think this is a good one, just in terms of timing. There's a bit of economic uncertainty, if we'll call it that, and some folks worry about tightening budgets. Automation is also the big talk of the day here. So the question is, any suggestions on automated solutions that will have a significant impact or cost savings with ROI?
Well, sure, buy Pathlock. Right. I recommend using Pathlock to automate and reduce the costs associated with managing SAP. I've got a great
At a
recommendation.
high level, that's a great self-promotion, but let's get in like more specifics here. Stephen,
Yeah,
I
I
have
would just
no
say
answer.
to that point though with Pathlock or whatever automated solutions you buy. We used to just say, you didn't really build ROI around compliance and risk management solutions. You just, that's the cost of compliance. But that's not the case anymore due to exactly what you're talking about, Ron, the economic hardships, different things that are happening across the world today. You have to find ROI or try to find ROI in everything. And the fact of the matter is you can, whether it's automating SOD monitoring across multiple systems, you're either going to do it manually or you're going to do it with automation. You do it manually, there's a lot of costs associated with that. There's a lot of error-prone activities that can be missed when you do a lot of things manually. I would say too, we've had customers, and I don't want to get into too many of the specifics, but you may have 200 or 300 compliance owners across the globe. If you're a if you're a global corporation running in 50, 60 countries, a lot of control owners running manual controls can add up to huge ROIs immediately. You can pay off automated solutions or software in months, not years anymore. And so I think it's just a lot of factors in play there, but you have two options, I think, or three. You don't do anything, you do it manually, or you buy software that can give you a complete end-to-end framework, complete automation, 100% monitoring, and with that comes confidence too, which is, I think, a big key. And I would say two things back to the, getting ready to embark on S4, embrace change, be ready for it, it's coming, look for opportunities everywhere you can to enact change. And that can be as simple as configuring different controls in things like Ariba or Coupa, looking at where you can do away with risk because you have very configurable systems that can help you remove SODs within some of the cloud applications. Always look for the opportunities first to keep things from happening. But I would say, embrace change and just be ready to kind of add value. If you have GRC solutions already, you can provide a lot of value to the go forward organization. I was going to say something else, but I lost my train of thought, so I'll stop there.
And Ryan, it looks like we have one more question from a Jim Tarleton.
Yes, see it right here. So he was asking if we could get a bit more technical on how the tool works for the importance of GRC prior to your S4 migration. So from a more technical perspective, how this thing works.
So I'll give one example of how one of our tools, and it's important to mention that we have a pretty broad portfolio of I think 15 different modules that could support S/4HANA in one way or the other. But one of the areas that we've done that I think is really interesting, and Alan's pointed to it, is that we can look at the transaction history of your ECC users and then identify what transactions they have used and build you that list in terms of identifying what needs to change in an ECC role for an S/4HANA role. And then we've done the research to identify what transaction codes are being deprecated in S4 and suggesting how to redesign the role to include the appropriate S4 transaction code. And then we give you basically the ability to push a button, if you will, and automatically create a role in S4HANA that now uses the new transaction codes in S4HANA and deprecates the older transaction codes from ECC. And then we allow you to piggyback that new S4HANA role onto the user's profile, or the user ID, so that when they go in and begin to use S4HANA, if they end up using something from their previous role in ECC that's not in their new role, then it documents that. But more importantly, it gives them the ability to do it with that old role, so that they don't lose any productivity as they move into S/4HANA. But it allows the IT team to go back in then and tune the new S4 role with that insight, so that the end user ends up, when it's all said and done, with an S4 role that's properly built for them based on the transaction history, so that without incurring a productivity hit during the migration. But I'll let Alan get into more details on that. But that's just one example in terms of where we're doing some things around looking at deprecated T codes, building roles based on user transaction history, and then giving them the chance to make sure that it's properly tested without having a productivity hit while they're actually doing their job in S4.
Steve, I don't think I can add a lot to that in the time frame we've got left. That was a very good description of it's actually a couple different processes there within our tool that can save an enormous amount of time and effort, and not just in the security team, but in the end user team, the guys doing the testing, and then it go live. It saves a lot of frustration, a lot of anger, and lets people keep getting their work done much more smoother, at go live than you would normally have.
And while we've been talking about transaction codes relative to roles, it's important to realize that the SOD matrix, right? If those transaction codes change, then your SOD rules for managing SAP are going to change too. So there's that link around how are you updating your SOD matrix properly. And then there's a whole discussion around how we can provide some dynamic capabilities to help folks harmonize their SOD rules across different ERP landscapes, whether it's ECC and S4 on Monday, and then it's just two S4 environments on Tuesday, whatever it is. There's a lot of work that Pathlock has done around harmonizing your SOD matrix in a way that doesn't require an awful lot of maintenance. But we can go into more detail later. If of course, we have some folks that would love to talk with you in more detail after this webinar about your particular situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Feel free to reach out, or we'll reach out to you. Keep the conversations going. We love having these webinars here. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap up here with a few announcements. We've got upcoming events in terms of webinars and in person. Up next is ISACA GRC. Excited about this one here. We got a good session, good demo online coming up in late August. And then a few other webinars. And keep in mind, we're not just SAP. We are a cross-application solution. Many of the leading ERP applications and business applications, one of them being PeopleSoft. So we have a webinar around PeopleSoft coming up next week on Thursday. And in August as well, we have a SAP-focused webinar that is cross-app as well, really around cross-app continuous control monitoring. With that, I want to say a big thank you to our panelists today, to Susan, Stephen, and Alan, and thank you to all of our attendees. Thanks, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.